I've been blessed in my life. One of the things that I've been blessed with is being able to own and operate an airplane. It's a two-seat plane, but it's really not practical for two people to go on a trip. Recently, I flew to West Virginia. My folks and family all lived in the southern part of West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains, and my wife wasn't able to come, and so I thought, well, it'd be a good time to fly down there. It was a good flight down there, had some good memories, and of course, being with family is always a good thing, and had a good trip. And but the flight back was a whole nother matter. While I was down there, I was checking the weather forecast to figure out what the best day would be to come back, and I'd found the good day. So the night before I was supposed to leave, I was going to leave in the morning, and I checked the forecast before I went to bed, and it looked great. So I'd be able to leave in the morning, come home. But imagine my surprise when I woke up that morning to heavy rain and thunder, and I got up and checked the weather, and everything had changed overnight. It was pop-up thunderstorms and fog and low clouds and rain. None of that was in the forecast. But that morning I was getting anxious because I was wanting to leave, needed to leave, but I had to wait for the weather. Did a lot of pacing, and the forecast showed that it was going to let up around lunchtime, and it actually did. So I checked the weather one more time. It looked good, so me and my dad, we went ahead and went to the airport. As we were getting ready to pull into the airport, we saw an ambulance coming the other way with his lights flashing, and then the ambulance pulled into the airport right in front of us. I had my mind set on getting the airplane ready, getting it loaded so I could get out. And as it turns out, they had a critical patient in the back of the ambulance that they had stabilized, and they were waiting on a lifeline helicopter. Helicopter came in and landed right in front of my plane. All these thoughts are going through my head when he landed to me, but then I started thinking less selfishly about the poor guy that was in the ambulance. And finally the helicopter left, and I knew that the weather was kind of iffy, and the Appalachian Mountains could be pretty intimidating to fly over. So my dad and we said a little prayer, and then I started my engine and I set off. Before I did that, I checked the weather one more time, and it looked pretty good on the radar, except for there was two large weather systems, but they were both away from my flight path. I was going to be able to fly right between them. They were far enough apart that I felt I could safely do that. I set out on my trip. It wasn't very long into the flight when I started getting into the mountains that I lost my primary communication radio. My radar was still working, my GPS was still working, so I pressed on. As I was getting close to the two weather systems, I zoomed in so I could make sure I stayed clear of them. And as I started going into the corridor between them, I thought something told me to zoom out and get a better picture of what I was going to be in for. And I looked, and I'm glad I did, because there was a lot of pop-up storms that had just started forming on my flight path. And the two weather systems were getting bigger, and they were growing together. Luckily, I saw it in time to be able to turn more north and to fly around the weather. And I made it back. It delayed my flight quite a bit. And when I got here, I was safe, but I was exhausted. When I arrived here that night, I just pulled in front of this hangar here, and I was just sort of in a daze, and I just left the engine running. I was just sitting there thinking about what I had just experienced. I thought about all the people that were praying for me. I also thought about that lifeline helicopter and that poor guy that was in trouble. And I thought about, that delay, that helicopter, how it delayed me, 20 minutes or so. And if it hadn't have, would I have entered into that weather corridor, and with all those pop-up storms coming, I was over mountainous terrain. And if I had gone into there and all those pop-ups had come in around me, I would have had no place to go. I was just sitting there in the airplane with the engine running, thinking of these things. And I had a smile on my face, but I had a tear in my eye. And I thought about my dad's life. He was a flight crew member for most of his career, and they flew all over the world, a lot of times into third world countries, and sometimes the countries were hostile. He said one of the things that he missed most about his job was basically living on the edge. With that environment that he was working in, it was nearly impossible to have full control over what was going to go on from day to day. In comparison to my dad's life, I worked 9-to-5 jobs, so my job is more routine. And because of that, my life is a little bit more routine. It's been my experience that if your life is too routine, you can start to get too comfortable. It was probably about a month or so ago, I saw a young man wearing a shirt, and on the front of his shirt he had stenciled, "There's no growth in the comfort zone." And I thought, well, I know that's not scripture, but when I read that, I'm like, oh my, that just stopped me dead in the tracks. I was like, that is so true. But I tend to default to a life of my own understanding, and then I can sort of turn into a doubting Thomas. And how can I, when you have a God that controls and makes so many great things happen, whether it's a subtle reminder of God's presence or a dramatic one, seeing how God is, all the little nuances of what God is doing. Just doing what God's, what God is telling you to do. Just step out in faith when things look hard or things look scary. Don't worry so much about being comfortable. There's no growth in comfort. I'm McClung, and we all have a story to tell.